"Go eat outside, on the street, you beggar!" my son Richard screamed when I tried to sit down at the table in the restaurant. I took a deep breath, motioned to the waiter, and replied calmly, "All right, but in that case, you're the ones who will have to leave." The words came out of my mouth with a calmness that even I didn't expect. All the diners at the Gilded Scepter restaurant turned to look at us. Richard was frozen, his face red with shame. His wife, Jessica, dropped her wine glass on the white tablecloth. What my son didn't know was who I really am. My name is Susan. I am 65 years old, and that night, everything was going to change forever. But let me tell you how I got to that moment. Because what happened after my words was something that no one, absolutely no one, expected. It all began 3 hours earlier, when Richard called me on the phone. "Mom, I want to take you to dinner at the best restaurant in the city. I have something to celebrate, and I want you to be there." His voice sounded different, almost mocking. But I, as always, wanted to believe that my son was finally including me in his successful life. I got ready with such care that night. I put on my best dress, an emerald green one I had bought years ago but rarely wore. I did my hair meticulously, put on a little makeup, and even wore the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. I wanted to look presentable for my successful son. Richard had done very well for himself in recent years. He was a regional manager for a major company, had a large house in the most exclusive neighborhood, and his wife, Jessica, always wore expensive clothes. But with me, his own mother, he was increasingly cold and distant. I arrived at the Gilded Scepter restaurant at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. It was an elegant place, with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and waiters dressed in tuxedos. The kind of place where a single dinner costs more than $200 per person. A place I knew very well, although Richard had no idea. When I asked for Richard Garcia's table, the maitre d'Arthur looked me up and down. My green dress, though my best, looked modest compared to the elegant outfits of the other women dining there. "Of course, ma'am." "Follow me, please," he said with a professional smile. I walked behind him between the tables, feeling all the curious eyes on me. Some people whispered to each other, probably wondering what a woman like me was doing in such an exclusive place. Richard was already sitting at a table in the center, next to Jessica. She was wearing a very expensive red dress and jewelry that sparkled under the restaurant lights. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was no chair for me. "Hello, son," I said with a forced smile, expecting him to get up to give me a hug or at least to explain where I was going to sit. Richard looked at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Mom, you're here." He didn't get up. He didn't greet me warmly. Jessica didn't even look up from her plate. "And my chair?" I asked, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "Your chair?" Richard started to laugh. But it wasn't a happy laugh. It was cruel, merciless. "Mom, I didn't invite you to dinner. I told you to come so you could see how successful people live, so you can understand the difference between you and us." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. People at the nearby tables started paying more attention to us. "Son, I don't understand," I murmured, trying to maintain my dignity. "You don't understand?" Richard raised his voice. "Mom, look at yourself. Look at this place. Do you really think you belong here? We come to this restaurant every week. We spend more on one dinner than you spend in a whole month." Jessica finally spoke, without looking up from her food. "Richard, don't be so hard on her. It's not your mother's fault she's, well, the way she is." Those words hurt more than my own son's. The humiliation was so intense that I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but there was something they didn't know. Something I had kept secret for all these years. And that night, that secret was about to come out in the most spectacular way possible. "Richard, please," I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "I just wanted to spend some time with you. We haven't talked like mother and son for months." My son leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as if he were enjoying my discomfort. "Talk? What are we going to talk about, Mom? Your boring life? How you spend your days watching soap operas in your little apartment?" The people at the nearby tables were no longer hiding the fact that they were listening to our conversation. An elegant couple at the next table exchanged pitying glances in my direction. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but something inside me told me to stay calm. "Son, I work hard. I've always worked hard to get by," I replied, trying to hold on to my dignity. "I don't have much money, it's true, but I have my pride." Jessica let out a dismissive little laugh. "Pride? Susan, forgive me, but what can you possibly be proud of? You live in a 2-room apartment, you take the bus everywhere, and you buy your clothes at discount stores." Every word was like a stab, but what hurt the most was seeing the satisfied smile on my son's face. How had he become this cruel person? Where was the sweet boy I had raised with so much love? "Mom," Richard continued, raising his voice so more people could hear, "the truth is, I'm embarrassed to introduce you as my mother. Look at Jessica. Look at how she dresses, how she talks, how she carries herself. That's the kind of woman who belongs with someone like me." Jessica smiled, pleased, and adjusted her dyed blonde hair. Her red dress must have cost more than $1,000, and her shoes were from an Italian brand I knew very well. All too well. "Jessica comes from an important family," Richard went on. "Her father owns 3 car dealerships. She went to a private university, speaks 3 languages, and understands business. And you? What can you teach me? How to survive on $200 a week?" The tears threatened to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. There was something Richard didn't know. Something Jessica didn't know either. Something that no one in my family knew, and that tonight was about to change their lives forever. The waiter, Arthur, discreetly approached our table. I had known him for years, though he couldn't say anything at that moment. He looked at me with a concerned expression in his eyes. "Would you like to order anything else?" he asked politely. "No, thank you," Richard replied curtly. "My mother won't be having dinner with us. In fact, I think it's time for her to leave." "But son," I murmured, "I thought you said you wanted to celebrate something with me." Richard laughed again. "Celebrate with you? Mom, what I want to celebrate is my promotion, my new position, my successful life. Do you think I want to celebrate that with someone who reminds me of where I came from? Jessica and I belong to a different social level than you." "Richard is right," Jessica added, taking a sip of her wine, which cost $100 a bottle. "We frequent places like this because we can afford it. We have the money, the education, and the social class to be here. It's nothing personal against you, Susan, but there are differences that can't be ignored." I looked around the restaurant. It was truly beautiful. The crystal chandeliers shone softly, the paintings on the walls were original works of art, and the piano music created a perfect atmosphere. Every detail had been carefully selected to create the most elegant experience possible. "This restaurant is really beautiful," I commented in a low voice. "Of course it's beautiful," Richard replied arrogantly. "It's the most expensive in the entire city. The waiting list to get a table here is 3 months. But when you have money and connections, like us, doors open." Jessica nodded. "We know the manager, the chef, and even the owner." "Well, Richard knows the owner personally," she added. "That's why we always get the best table." A small smile appeared on my lips. If only she knew the truth about who really knew the owner of this restaurant. "Mom, why are you smiling like that?" Richard looked at me suspiciously. "Do you find it funny that I'm explaining how the real world works?" "No, son," I replied calmly. "I was just thinking about something." "About what?" "That you're right about one thing. There are indeed differences that can't be ignored. Differences that you don't know about, but that tonight will become very clear." Richard and Jessica exchanged a confused look. The tone of my voice had changed. It no longer sounded like the humble, submissive mother they knew. "What are you talking about?" Jessica asked with some unease. Before I could answer, another waiter approached the table. It was Oscar, the restaurant manager, a distinguished man in his 50s with an impeccable suit and refined manners. "Good evening," he greeted politely. "Is everything all right at your table?" Richard sat up straighter in his chair, obviously pleased to receive the manager's attention. "Everything is perfect, Oscar. As always, the service is exceptional." Oscar smiled professionally, but when his eyes met mine, I noticed a small flicker of recognition. He knew who I was. Of course he knew. "I'm glad to hear that," Oscar replied. Then he looked directly at me. "Ma'am, are you enjoying your visit tonight?" The question seemed innocent, but there was something more behind it. Richard didn't notice, but I did. Oscar was waiting for my signal. "Oscar," I said in a firm voice, "I think it's time for you to speak with the owner. There is a situation here that requires his immediate attention." Oscar nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting those words all night. "Of course, ma'am. The owner will be here in a moment." Richard frowned, clearly confused by the exchange. "The owner? What are you talking about? Mom, do you know the manager of this place?" Jessica also seemed bewildered. "Susan, how do you know Oscar?" I smiled but didn't answer. I just waited. The next few minutes would be the most important of my life, and definitely the most shocking for my son. Meanwhile, Richard turned to Oscar with his typical arrogance. "Hey, Oscar, I don't know what's going on here, but my mother is a bit confused lately. Sometimes she says things that don't make sense. Her age, you know." Oscar maintained his professional smile, but said nothing. His silence only increased the tension at the table. "Why aren't you answering?" Richard insisted. "Do you really know my mother?" "Young Mr. Garcia," Oscar replied carefully, "I think it's best if we wait for the owner. He will be able to clear up all your doubts." Jessica leaned closer to Richard and whispered, "This is very strange. Your mother is acting bizarrely. Do you think she's all there?" Her words were just loud enough for me to hear, but instead of hurting me, they gave me more strength, because I knew that in a few minutes, she would eat every one of those words. The people at the nearby tables had noticed the tension. Some diners had stopped eating to discreetly watch what was happening. The murmur of conversations had subsided, as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath. Richard began to get impatient. "Mom, this is ridiculous. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over. Jessica and I want to enjoy our dinner in peace." "In peace?" I repeated, my voice growing firmer. "Like the peace you've given me all these years? Like the peace of being treated like a stranger by my own son?" "Enough," Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The glasses trembled, and several people turned completely towards us. "You're making a scene. You're embarrassing me in front of all these important people." Jessica put her hand on Richard's arm. "Calm down, honey. People are staring." "Exactly." Richard stood up, his face red with anger. "Mom, I'm going to ask you to leave right now. You're ruining my night, my celebration, my reputation." I remained seated, completely calm. "Your reputation? The reputation of someone who treats his own mother like trash?" "You're not trash," Richard yelled, but his tone said otherwise. You're just different from us. You belong to another world. A world of ordinary people, of people without ambition, of people who settle for little." The words echoed throughout the restaurant. An uncomfortable silence fell over the place. Even the waiters had stopped their activities to watch the scene. Jessica stood up as well. "Susan, please. Richard is right. This isn't your place. Look around you. Look at how other people see you. They're looking at you with pity." She was right about one thing. People were looking at me. But not with pity. There was something else in their expressions. Curiosity, expectation, as if they knew something important was about to happen. "Do you know how much this dinner costs, Mom?" Richard continued, pointing at the table. $300. Just for what we've had so far. That's more than you spend on food in an entire month. "And do you know how much the wine you're drinking costs?" I added calmly. $250 a bottle. Dom Perignon 2015. An excellent choice. Richard looked at me, surprised. "How do you know that?" "Because I know this place well, son. Very well." Jessica laughed. "You know this place well? Since when? From looking at the menu from the outside?" Her comment drew a few nervous chuckles from the nearby tables. But I was unfazed. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared, walking towards our table. It was a distinguished man in his 60s, with a perfectly tailored gray suit and a presence that commanded immediate respect. Oscar followed closely behind him. Richard recognized him immediately. "Mr. Gregory," he exclaimed with a servile smile. "What an honor to see you here. I'm Richard Garcia. I believe we met briefly at the business conference last month." Gregory nodded politely. "Yes, I vaguely remember." But his eyes were fixed on me. "Good evening, Susan." The way he said my name made Richard freeze. It wasn't the greeting of a successful businessman to an ordinary old woman. It was the greeting of someone who knew me well. "Good evening, Gregory," I replied naturally. "I'm so sorry you have to come down here for this matter." Jessica looked at Richard, completely confused. "How does your mother know Mr. Gregory?" Richard stammered. I don't know. Mom, how do you know Mr. Gregory?" Gregory approached the table, and his presence made all the nearby diners fall completely silent. "Mrs. Garcia," he said to me formally, "is there a problem I need to resolve?" The formal way he addressed me as Mrs. Garcia made Richard frown even more. Why would such an important man speak to me with so much respect? "Yes, there is a problem," I replied clearly. "My son and his wife have gravely disrespected me. They have publicly humiliated me in this restaurant, told me I don't belong here, and asked me to leave." Gregory nodded seriously. "I understand. And what would you like me to do about it?" Richard interrupted desperately. "Wait. Mr. Gregory, there's a misunderstanding. My mother is exaggerating. I was just explaining to her that this place is a bit sophisticated for her." Gregory turned to Richard with a cold expression. "Sophisticated for her? Are you telling your mother she has no right to be in this restaurant?" "That's not it," Richard protested. "It's just, well, she can't afford a dinner here. She lives on $200 a week. This isn't within her means." Jessica nodded vigorously. "Exactly. We weren't being cruel, just realistic. This place costs a fortune." Gregory looked at me again. "Is that true, Susan? You can't afford to dine here?" A slow smile spread across my face. It was the moment I had been waiting for years. The moment my son would discover who his mother really was. "Well, Gregory," I said, rising from my chair, "that depends on how you look at it." I took an envelope from my purse that I had been carrying with me for months, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. I placed it on the table, right in front of Richard. "What is that?" Jessica asked suspiciously. "Open it," I told Richard. "Open it and read what it says." Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. Jessica leaned in to get a better look. When Richard pulled out the documents and began to read, his face turned as pale as wax. "No, it can't be," he murmured. "What does it say?" Jessica asked anxiously, trying to see the documents over Richard's shoulder. "What can't be?" Richard read aloud, his voice shaking. "Certificate of ownership. The Gilded Scepter Restaurant. Owner, Susan Garcia." His voice faded to a whisper. Date of acquisition: March 15th, 2018. The silence that followed was deafening. The people at the nearby tables had completely stopped pretending they weren't listening. Some had even stood up slightly from their seats to get a better view of what was happening. Jessica snatched the papers from Richard's hands. "This has to be fake. It has to be a joke." "Susan, these documents are fake." Gregory cleared his throat. "Mrs. Garcia, I assure you those documents are completely authentic. Mrs. Susan Garcia is indeed the owner of this restaurant, and also of 4 other restaurants in the city." "4 other restaurants?" Richard exclaimed, still in shock. "Mom, this is impossible. You live in a small apartment, you take the bus, you shop at discount stores." I sat down again, feeling more powerful than I had in years. "It's true, son. I live simply because I choose to, but that doesn't mean I don't have money." "How much money?" Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. Gregory answered for me. "Mrs. Garcia has a net worth of approximately $8 million. Her restaurants generate annual profits of nearly $2 million. Richard sank into his chair as if he'd been physically struck. $8 million? "Why?" Jessica murmured. "Why did you never tell us anything?" I leaned back in my chair, observing the shocked and confused faces of my son and his wife, because I wanted to know the true character of the people around me. I wanted to know if you would love me for who I am, not for what I have. "But Mom," Richard stammered, "I'm your son. How could you hide something like this from me?" "How could I hide it from you?" I repeated, my voice filling with an anger I had suppressed for years. "Are you seriously asking me that after everything I've heard tonight?" I stood up again, and this time my posture was completely different. I was no longer the humble, submissive old woman. I was a successful businesswoman, a millionaire who had built an empire from scratch. "Richard, for the last 5 years, ever since you started to succeed in your job, you have treated me like a burden. You have made me feel ashamed of my appearance, of the way I dress, of the way I live." People at the nearby tables started murmuring among themselves. Some discreetly took out their phones, probably to record what was happening. "Remember last Christmas?" I continued. "When you told me it was better if I didn't come to your party because I wouldn't fit in with your important guests?" Richard shrank in his seat. "Mom, or Jessica's birthday 6 months ago? When you told me there was a dress code and that my clothes weren't appropriate for the event?" Jessica avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. "All this time," I went on, "you have assumed that I am poor, that I am a burden, that I am someone to be ashamed of. And tonight, you confirmed exactly what I suspected about you." Oscar discreetly approached and whispered in my ear, "Mrs. Garcia, would you like us to ask them to leave the restaurant?" Before I could answer, Richard stood up abruptly. "Wait. Mom, if you have so much money, why do you live the way you do? Why didn't you tell me anything? We're family." "Family?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "Family? Richard, 15 minutes ago you yelled at me to go eat on the street like a beggar. Is that what family does?" Jessica tried to intervene. "Susan, if we had known—" "If you had known what?" I interrupted her. "If you had known I had money, you would have treated me with respect? Is that your definition of family love? Conditional respect based on financial status?" A murmur of approval was heard from the nearby tables. Clearly, the other diners were enjoying the spectacle, and many seemed to be on my side. "Mom, please," Richard pleaded. "We can talk about this at home, in private." "In private?" I pointed around the restaurant. "Like when you humiliated me in public a few minutes ago? Like when you told all these witnesses that I don't belong here?" Gregory stepped closer to me. "Mrs. Garcia, as the general manager of your properties, I must ask, do you wish for us to take any specific action?" Richard turned to Gregory in desperation. "Mr. Gregory, please. She's my mother. There must be some way to resolve this." "Young man," Gregory replied coldly, "you have just spent the last 30 minutes insulting and humiliating the owner of this establishment. Not only that, but you did it in front of dozens of witnesses." Jessica started to cry. "We didn't know. If we had known she was the owner, we never would have." "Never would have what?" I interrupted her. "Never would have disrespected me? Do you only respect rich people? What kind of values are those?" An elegant man at a nearby table began to applaud slowly. Soon, other people joined in. It wasn't mocking applause, but one of admiration. They were applauding my stance, my dignity, my handling of the situation. Richard looked around, noticing for the first time that the entire restaurant's attention was on us. "Mom, people are staring at us." "Yes, they are staring at us," I confirmed. "They are seeing exactly the kind of person you really are. They are seeing how you treat your own mother when you think she has nothing to offer you." "But now I know you have money," Richard said desperately. "Now we know the truth. We can start over." "Start over?" I laughed bitterly. "Now that you know I have money, you want to start over? Now I'm good enough to be your mother?" Jessica wiped her tears and tried to take my hand. "Susan, please, forgive us. We didn't know." I pulled my hand away sharply. "Jessica, an hour ago you told me that Richard was ashamed to introduce me as his mother. You told me I didn't have the education, the social class, or the money to be here. Do you remember?" She nodded miserably. "Well, you were right about one thing. There are indeed differences between us that can't be ignored, but they are not the differences you thought they were." I walked towards the center of the restaurant, where everyone could see and hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority I had never before shown in front of my son. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, addressing the entire restaurant, "I am very sorry for the interruption to your dinner, but I think it's important that you, as witnesses to what has just happened here, know the whole story." An absolute silence fell over the place. Even the waiters stopped to listen. Richard tried to stand up to stop me, but Gregory placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stay seated. "My name is Susan Garcia, and I am the owner of this restaurant," I continued. "For the last 7 years, I have come here regularly, but always discreetly, observing how my business operates, getting to know my employees, making sure my customers receive the best possible service." Some diners nodded, and I noticed that several recognized me now. The elderly woman who sometimes sat alone at the corner table, who always ordered the same thing and left generous tips. But tonight, I went on. I was invited here by my own son, who publicly humiliated me, insulted me, and asked me to leave because, according to him, I do not belong in this place. A murmur of disapproval was heard throughout the restaurant. The expressions on people's faces showed a mixture of shock, indignation, and pity. Richard stood up abruptly. "Mom, stop. Don't do this. You're ruining my reputation." "Your reputation?" I turned to him with a cold smile. "Richard, you ruined your own reputation the moment you decided to treat your mother like trash in front of all these people." Jessica tried one last time to save herself. "Susan, please, understand our position. We had no way of knowing that." "That I had money?" I cut her off. "Is that really your excuse? That you didn't know I had money? That's why it was okay to disrespect me?" An elegant woman at a nearby table spoke up loudly. "Exactly. Respect doesn't depend on how much money someone has. It's a matter of basic decency." Other voices joined in agreement. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer an elegant, quiet dinner. It had become the stage for a public lesson on dignity and family respect. I turned back to Richard and Jessica. "But now that you know the truth, let me explain exactly how things are going to change." Richard looked desperate. "Mom, please, we can talk about this in private. Not here, not in front of all these people." "Why not here?" I replied firmly. "You had no problem humiliating me here in front of all these people. So right here is where you're going to listen to what I have to say." Oscar approached and offered me a chair in the center, as if it were a stage. I sat down elegantly, feeling for the first time in years the power and respect I deserved. "Richard," I began, "for the past 5 years, ever since you started earning a good salary, you have changed completely. You've become arrogant, dismissive, and you've forgotten where you come from." "Mom, Don't interrupt me." My voice echoed through the restaurant. "Now you are going to listen. You are going to listen to everything I have to say." Richard sank into his chair, clearly defeated. "Do you remember when you were 12 and you got pneumonia?" I continued. "Do you remember that we didn't have health insurance, and I worked 3 jobs for 2 months to pay for your treatment?" My voice broke slightly as I recalled those difficult times. "I worked during the day in an office, at night cleaning buildings, and on weekends in a restaurant. I slept 3 hours a night to make sure you had everything you needed." The people in the restaurant listened in complete silence. Some older women had tears in their eyes. "And do you know why I did all that?" I asked, looking directly at Richard. "Because I loved you. Because you were my son. Not because you had money, not because you could give me something in return, but because a mother's love is unconditional." Jessica began to cry again, but these were no longer tears of self-pity. She seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what they had done. "But you, Richard," I continued, "your love for me turned out to be completely conditional. You love me only when it's convenient, only when I don't embarrass you, only when I fit into your image of success." An older man at a table in the back shouted, "That's how you tell them, ma'am. Tell them their truths." The public approval gave me even more strength. "Now let me tell you how I got my money, because it's important that you understand it wasn't through luck or inheritance." Richard looked up, clearly curious despite his humiliation. "After your father died when you were 15, I explained, I was left alone with a huge debt and a son to support. But instead of sinking into self-pity, I decided to fight. I stood up again, walking slowly around the table as I spoke. I started by working as a waitress in a small restaurant, but I didn't settle for that. I watched, I learned, I studied every aspect of the business. How the kitchen worked, how the finances were managed, how to treat customers. The silence in the restaurant was total. Even the staff had stopped working to listen to my story. After 5 years, when I had enough experience and savings, I took out a loan and bought my first small restaurant. It was a modest place, in a humble neighborhood, but I turned it into a success." Jessica whispered, "That's why you know so much about restaurants." "Exactly," I replied, "because I built this empire from scratch, with my own hands, with my own effort. Every restaurant I bought after that was because I had proven that I could make a business work." Richard finally spoke, his voice broken. "Mom, I didn't know any of this." "You didn't know because you never asked," I snapped. "You were never interested in my life. You only cared that I didn't embarrass you in front of your successful friends." Gregory approached again. "Mrs. Garcia, would you like us to proceed?" "Proceed with what?" Richard asked in a panic. I turned to him with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The expulsion procedure. As the owner of this establishment, I have the right to deny entry to any person who causes a disturbance or disrespects other customers." "You can't do that," Jessica cried. "We're family." "Family?" I laughed. "An hour ago, you told me I wasn't good enough to be part of your family. Now that you know I have money, suddenly we're family again?" Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The diners were clearly enjoying seeing justice unfold. Richard stood up desperately. "Mom, please, forgive me. Forgive us. We can change. We can be better." "You can change?" I repeated. "You can be better?" "Richard, the problem isn't that you can change. The problem is that you only want to change now that you know I have money." I approached him, looking him directly in the eyes. "Tell me one thing, son. If right now I told you that I don't actually have any money, that this has all been a joke, how would you treat me? Would you go back to asking me to leave the restaurant?" Richard opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. The answer was clear in his silence. Richard's silence was more eloquent than any words. In that moment, both he and Jessica understood that they had been completely unmasked, not just in front of me, but in front of the entire restaurant full of witnesses. "Your silence says it all, son," I murmured, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. "After all, you know me better than I thought." Jessica tried one last desperate strategy. "Susan, we can really change. Richard has been under a lot of pressure at work lately. He hasn't been himself." I turned to her with a cold look. "Pressure at work? Is that your excuse for mistreating an elderly woman? For humiliating your husband's mother?" A businessman at a nearby table stood up. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I know Richard from work, and I can confirm that he talks about you in exactly the way he has treated you tonight. He always refers to you as my poor mother, or the burden I have to support." Richard turned pale as death. "Mr. Martinez, I never." That was taken out of context. "Taken out of context?" Mr. Martinez laughed. "Richard, last month, during the executive meeting, you said, and I quote, 'My mother is a simple woman who doesn't understand my standard of living. Sometimes it's embarrassing to have to explain why she can't accompany me to important social events.'" A murmur of outrage was heard throughout the restaurant. Richard tried to deny it, but the damage was already done. "You see, Richard," I said in a calm voice, "this isn't just about tonight. It's about how you really think of me. It's about the shame you feel for your own mother." I addressed the entire restaurant again. "Ladies and gentlemen, for years I have watched my son become a person I don't recognize, a person who values appearances more than feelings, a person who is ashamed of his roots." I walked slowly to the large restaurant window, from where the entire illuminated city could be seen. "You see that city out there? I started from the bottom, in the humblest neighborhoods. I worked washing dishes, cleaning tables, serving people who sometimes treated me poorly, but I never lost my dignity." I turned to Richard, who had his head down, completely defeated. "Yet my own son, my own blood, has made me feel more humiliated in these last few years than any stranger ever has." Jessica began to cry harder. "Susan, please, give us a chance. We can go to family therapy. We can fix this." "Family therapy?" I laughed bitterly. "Jessica, do you really think this can be fixed with therapy? Do you think you can cure years of contempt and humiliation with a few sessions?" Oscar approached discreetly. "Mrs. Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are several reporters outside. It seems someone has leaked the story on social media. Do you want me to keep them away?" Richard stood up abruptly. "Reporters? Mom, this is going to ruin my career. My boss is going to find out. Everyone in my company will know what happened." "Now you're worried about your career?" I replied firmly. "You weren't worried when you were screaming at me in front of the whole restaurant?" "It's different," Richard yelled desperately. "This was a private family conversation." "Private?" I pointed around the crowded restaurant. You scream at your mother in a public restaurant and you call it a private conversation? Mr. Martinez intervened again. Richard, I'm sorry to tell you, but several employees from our company are dining here tonight. The story has already reached the office. Your behavior will be reviewed by Human Resources. Richard fell back into his chair, as if he had been physically struck. No, it can't be. My career, my reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly, was ruined by you the moment you decided it was acceptable to treat your mother like trash. Jessica tried to take Richard's hand, but he pushed it away brusquely. This is all your fault, he yelled at her. You were the one who convinced me my mother was a burden. You were the one who told me to be ashamed of her. My fault? Jessica stood up, indignant. You were the one constantly complaining about her. I was just supporting you. And there it was, the truth finally coming out. Not only had they humiliated me tonight, but they had been bad-mouthing me for years, feeding each other's contempt for me. Enough, I said in a firm voice. Enough blaming each other. You are both equally responsible. I turned to Gregory. Please, bring the documents. What documents? Richard asked, his voice filled with terror. Gregory disappeared for a few minutes and returned with a thick folder. He opened it on the table and took out several papers. These, I said solemnly, are the documents that confirm I am the owner not only of this restaurant, but of a chain of 5 restaurants throughout the city. Jessica looked at the papers with wide eyes. 5 restaurants? Yes, 5 restaurants, including the Secret Garden, where you celebrated your anniversary last year, including Ocean View, where Richard took his important clients last month, including the Gilded Terrace, where Jessica celebrated her birthday. Richard looked up sharply. You own all those places? That's right. And every time you have gone to those restaurants, bragging about your success, your money, your social status, you have been spending money in businesses that belong to me. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone. Several diners began to laugh softly, enjoying the poetic justice of the moment. But there's more, I continued, taking another document from the folder. This is my current will. The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear a fork drop on the farthest tables. In this will, I said clearly, I left my entire fortune to my only son, Richard Garcia. $8 million, 5 restaurants, and several real estate properties. Richard's eyes widened. Left? Why do you say left? I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found justice. Because after tonight, after what you have shown yourself to be, that will is going to change. No, Richard shouted, standing up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. Mom, please! I'm your only son. I'm your family. My family? I laughed. Richard, an hour ago you told me to go eat on the street like a beggar. That's how you treat your family. Jessica stood up too, panic in her eyes. Susan, please, think about it. Richard made a mistake, but he's still your son. Blood is more important than anything. Blood is more important than anything, I repeated. Then why has my own blood treated me worse than any stranger? I turned to the whole restaurant. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been witnesses to everything that has happened here tonight. You have seen how my son has treated me, how he has humiliated me, how he has been ashamed of me. The diners nodded, many with expressions of approval for my stance. Well then, I continued, you will also be witnesses to the consequences. I took my cell phone out of my purse and dialed a number Richard didn't recognize. Good evening, Mr. Arthur Lewis? Yes, this is Susan Garcia. I need you to come immediately to the Gilded Scepter restaurant with the documents we prepared last week. Yes, it's urgent. The new will. Richard froze. New will? You already prepared a new will? I ended the call and looked him straight in the eye. Richard, did you really think this was the first time you humiliated me? Did you think I hadn't noticed how you've treated me all these years? Jessica intervened desperately. But, Susan, don't you think you're being too drastic? He's your only son. Drastic? I turned to her with contained fury. Jessica, for the last 5 years, your husband has systematically excluded me from his life. He has made me feel like a stranger in my own family. I walked to the center of the restaurant, where everyone could hear me clearly. My voice rose with an authority that surprised even myself. Do you want to know why I decided to live simply despite having money? I asked the entire restaurant. Because I wanted to test something. I wanted to see if the people who claimed to love me really did so for who I am, not for what I have. A murmur of understanding spread through the tables. People were beginning to understand the depth of my social experiment. For 7 years, I continued, I have lived in a modest apartment, worn simple clothes, taken the bus, and acted as if I were an ordinary retiree. And do you know what I discovered? Richard looked at me with growing terror, as if finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. I discovered that my own son was ashamed of me. I discovered that he saw me as a burden. I discovered that he would rather exclude me from his life than explain to his rich friends that he had a poor mother. Tears began to form in my eyes, but my voice remained steady. Do you know what it feels like for your own son to ask you not to come to his wedding because you don't fit the level of the event? A choked gasp was heard from several tables. Some older women had their hands over their hearts, clearly moved by my words. Richard turned pale. Mom, I never said that exactly. Didn't you? I took out my phone and searched through my messages. Here is your text message from April 15th, 2023. Mom, Jessica and I have decided to have a small wedding, just close family and important friends. I think it would be better if you didn't come. The venue is very elegant, and I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. I read the message aloud so the whole restaurant could hear. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs of indignation, some applause of support for me, and shocked expressions on the faces of the diners. That message doesn't say you can't come, Richard protested desperately. Doesn't it? I continued reading. Besides, most of the guests are colleagues from my work and important clients. I need to maintain a certain professional image. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jessica looked ashamed. Maintain a certain professional image, I repeated slowly. Translated, your mother would ruin your professional image. An older man at a table in the back stood up. Ma'am, my mother was right when she said that ungrateful children are the worst misfortune a woman can have. Several diners applauded his comment. The atmosphere of the restaurant had completely changed. It was no longer just a spectacle. It had become a public trial on family values. Richard looked around the restaurant, noticing for the first time that all the attention was truly on us. Mom, please, let's go home. We can talk about this in private. Home? I laughed bitterly. To which home, Richard? To my modest apartment that embarrasses you so much? Or to your big house in the exclusive neighborhood where I've never been welcome? Jessica tried to intervene. Susan, you've always been welcome in our home. Welcome? I took out my phone again. Let me read you some of the messages Jessica has sent me over the past 2 years. Jessica turned pale. No, please. Message from December 8th, 2024. I read aloud. Susan, Richard and I are having a Christmas dinner with our friends. I think it would be better if you came another day, when we can dedicate more time to you. I continued reading. Message from March 22nd, 2024. Susan, this weekend we have important guests. Could you come visit us during the week, when it's quieter? Each message I read generated more murmurs of disapproval from the nearby tables. Do you see the pattern? I asked the restaurant. There was always an excuse. There was always a reason why I couldn't be present when there were. Important people. Richard slumped in his chair, completely defeated. Mom, we thought you preferred. That I preferred what? I interrupted him. That I preferred to be alone? That I preferred to be excluded from the life of my only son? At that moment, the restaurant door opened, and a distinguished man in his 60s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. It was Mr. Arthur Lewis, my lawyer. Good evening, Mrs. Garcia, he greeted formally. I brought the documents you requested. Richard stood up abruptly. What documents? Mom, please, don't do anything you might regret. Regret? I turned to him with a cold smile. Richard, the only thing I regret is not having done this sooner. Mr. Lewis opened his briefcase and took out several documents. Mrs. Garcia, here is the new will we prepared last week. as well as the property transfer documents we discussed. Property transfer? Jessica asked, her voice breaking. Yes, I replied calmly. I have decided to leave my fortune to charitable organizations that help elderly people abandoned by their families, and also to loyal employees who have shown me more respect and affection than my own blood. Arthur, the waiter who had served us all night, approached timidly. Mrs. Garcia, are you sure you want to do this here, in front of so many people? I smiled at him with genuine affection. Arthur, for 5 years you have been kinder to me than my own son. You have always treated me with respect, no matter how I was dressed or how much money you thought I had. Arthur blushed. You have always been a very elegant lady, Mrs. Garcia, and you always leave the best tips. Tips? Richard looked at me, confused. Arthur replied. Your mother always leaves $100 tips, young man, and she always asks about our families, about our problems. She is the most generous and kind customer we have. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Clearly, this was another revelation he hadn't expected. That's right, I confirmed. For all these years, while you thought I lived on $200 a week, I was helping employees who needed it, donating to charities and supporting families in need. Jessica murmured. How much money have you donated? In the last 5 years, I replied. I have donated approximately $1 million to various causes, money I could have used to live luxuriously, but which I chose to use to help others. Spontaneous applause erupted from several tables. The diners clearly approved of my philanthropic actions. While you were ashamed of my poverty, I continued, I was using my money to do good. While you excluded me for not being sophisticated enough, I was being more generous than you have ever been. Richard stood up in desperation. Mom, all that is very well, but I am your son. I am your only family. You can't leave all your money to strangers. Strangers? I laughed. Richard, Arthur knows me better than you do. Oscar respects me more than you do. The employees of my restaurants have shown me more affection than you have in the last 5 years. I turned to Mr. Lewis. Sir, please, prepare the documents. I want to sign the new will tonight. No, Richard shouted, trying to approach the table where the documents were. You can't do this. I'm your son. I have rights. Oscar intervened firmly. Young man, please maintain your composure. Mrs. Garcia has every right to dispose of her fortune as she sees fit. This is madness. Jessica began to cry hysterically. Susan, Richard made a mistake, but he doesn't deserve to lose his entire inheritance. I stopped a few steps from the table where the documents were and turned slowly towards Jessica. A mistake? You call 5 years of constant humiliation a mistake? Mr. Lewis placed the documents on the main table where everyone could see. Mrs. Garcia, before proceeding, I must ask, are you completely sure of this decision? Once signed, these documents will be legally binding. Sir, I replied in a firm voice, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Richard ran towards the table, but Oscar and 2 waiters stopped him gently but firmly. Mom, wait, give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to change. A chance? I turned to him in disbelief. Richard, you've had 5 years of chances. Every time you excluded me from an event, it was a lost chance. Every time you were ashamed of me, it was a lost chance. Jessica stood up, swaying slightly. Susan, please, think about this rationally. If you take away Richard's inheritance, you're also punishing your future grandchildren. A sad smile crossed my face. My future grandchildren? Jessica, you've been married for 3 years. How many times have you included me in conversations about having children? How many times have you made me feel like I would be a welcome grandmother? Jessica couldn't answer. The truth is, I continued, you don't want me to be a part of your future children's lives. You don't want a poor, uneducated grandmother influencing the upbringing of your successful children. A murmur of understanding was heard throughout the restaurant. The diners could clearly see the logic in my words. Mr. Lewis opened the document folder. Mrs. Garcia, here are the new documents. The will divides your fortune between 5 charitable organizations and 10 employees of your restaurants who have shown exceptional loyalty. Richard tried to approach again, but this time his voice was pleading. Mom, please, at least leave me a small part. Not everything, but something. A chance to prove to you that I can change. I paused with the pen in my hand. A small part? So you can continue to live comfortably without learning anything from this experience? No, Richard protested, so I can prove that I've learned my lesson, so I can earn you back. Jessica approached me with tears in her eyes. Susan, give him a chance. Set conditions. Make him earn your forgiveness. I looked at my son, who stood there with red eyes and a broken face. For the first time in years, I saw real vulnerability in him, not the superficial arrogance he had shown for so long. Conditions? I repeated slowly. What kind of conditions? Richard lit up with hope. Whatever you want, Mom. Anything. I'll do whatever it takes. Mr. Lewis looked at me questioningly. Mrs. Garcia, would you like us to explore that option? We can create a conditional will. I walked slowly around the table, considering the possibilities. The entire restaurant was in complete silence, waiting for my decision. Very well, I said finally. If you really want a chance, Richard, here are my conditions. Richard nodded desperately. Yes, anything. First condition, I announced clearly so the whole restaurant could hear. For the next year, you and Jessica will volunteer at a nursing home. Every weekend. Without exception, Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but Richard stopped her. I accept. What else? Second condition, you will move out of your big house and live on a budget of $1,500 a month. The same budget you thought I had. Richard paled. But Mom, my mortgage, my expenses. What, Richard? You can't live on the budget you considered adequate for your mother? The comment drew some nervous laughter from the nearby tables. Third condition, I continued. You will work part-time in one of my restaurants, as a waiter. You will experience what it's like to serve others, to treat people from all social classes with respect. As a waiter? Jessica asked in horror. But Richard is an executive. Exactly, I replied. And it's time he learned some humility. Richard took a deep breath. I accept. Is there more? Fourth condition, you will write public letters of apology. One letter to the local newspaper apologizing for your behavior towards the elderly. One letter to your company, taking responsibility for your lack of family values. The color completely drained from Richard's face. Mom, that would ruin my career. Your career? I laughed. Richard, after what happened here tonight, your career is already ruined. This will at least give you a chance to save it with dignity. Mr. Martinez, Richard's colleague, stood up. Excuse me, Mrs. Garcia, but I must tell you that the company is already considering suspending Richard. His behavior tonight goes against all of our corporate values. Richard turned to him in desperation. Mr. Martinez, please? I'm sorry, Richard, Mr. Martinez replied firmly. Our company values family respect and personal integrity. What we have seen here tonight is unacceptable. I turned back to Richard. You see, your career is already in jeopardy. My conditions would at least give you a way to redeem yourself. And the fifth condition? Richard asked, his voice breaking. The fifth condition is the most important, I said solemnly. For 1 full year, you and Jessica will visit me every week. Not because I have money, but because I am your mother. You will spend time with me. You will really get to know me. You will learn who I am as a person. Jessica muttered. That doesn't sound so hard, doesn't it? I turned to her. Jessica, when was the last time you had a real conversation with me? A conversation where you asked me about my dreams, my fears, my life experiences? Jessica couldn't answer. And do you know what the sixth condition is? I added. Sixth? Richard asked nervously. If during this 1-year trial you fail to meet any of these conditions, or if you show that you are only acting for the money, the original will is automatically activated. All the money will go to charity. Mr. Lewis nodded. That is perfectly legal, Mrs. Garcia. We can create a conditional will with those specifications. Richard looked at Jessica, who reluctantly nodded. I accept all the conditions, Mom. I completely accept them. Good, I said, picking up the pen. But there's one more thing I need to say before I sign any document. The whole restaurant held its breath. What happened here tonight cannot be undone. The words you said, the humiliation you caused me, the pain you made me feel that is now a part of our history." Richard nodded, with tears in his eyes. "I know, Mom. I know, and I'm so sorry." "Don't tell me you're sorry," I replied firmly. "Show me. Show me over the next year that you have truly learned something from this experience." I turned to Mr. Lewis. "Sir, prepare the conditional will, with all the conditions I have mentioned." "Of course, Mrs. Garcia," he replied, beginning to write. While the lawyer prepared the documents, I addressed the entire restaurant one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have witnessed a very important lesson tonight. You have seen what happens when people value money more than respect, when they confuse material success with human worth." Applause started at one table and spread throughout the restaurant. It was applause of approval, of respect, of admiration for the way I had handled the situation. "I hope," I continued, "that you all remember this night when you interact with your own families. I hope you remember that respect and love do not have an admission price." The applause grew louder. Some people stood up, giving me an ovation. Richard approached me timidly. "Mom, can I hug you?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Richard, hugs are something that are earned. Over the next year, you are going to have to earn every hug, every smile, every moment of affection." He nodded, finally understanding the magnitude of what he had lost. 6 months after that night, that changed everything. I was sitting at the same table in the Gilded Scepter restaurant, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. There was no tension, no shouting, no humiliation. There was only a 65-year-old woman watching her son work as a waiter in her own restaurant. Richard approached my table with a tray in his hands, wearing the black uniform of the restaurant. His face no longer showed arrogance or shame. There was something new in his eyes, genuine humility. "Good evening, Mrs. Garcia," he said with a smile that seemed real for the first time in years. "What would you like to order tonight?" I smiled, but maintained my composure. "Richard, how was your day?" "Difficult," he admitted, sitting in the chair across from me when I gestured. A customer yelled at me because his soup was too hot. Another complained because I took 30 seconds to bring him water. And a lady treated me as if I were invisible. "And how did that make you feel?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Richard looked down, horrible, humiliated, like I wasn't a whole person. He looked up at me. "Is that how I made you feel for so many years?" It was the first time in months that he had directly admitted the parallel between his current experience and how he had treated me. It was progress. "And Jessica?" I asked. "How is she handling the changes?" "Better than I expected," Richard answered honestly. "At first, she complained a lot about the small apartment, the limited budget, the volunteer work at the nursing home. But something changed a few weeks ago." "What changed?" "She met an 80-year-old woman named Teresa. Her children abandoned her 5 years ago. She hasn't received a single visit in all that time." Richard paused, his eyes watering slightly. Jessica realized that woman was exactly what you would have become if I had continued on the same path. I felt a warmth in my chest. It was the first time I had heard that Jessica had made a real emotional connection with the situation. "Teresa told Jessica how her children only visited when they needed money," Richard continued. "How they would promise to come for dinner, but always had last-minute excuses. How she felt invisible in her own family. And it affected her. Jessica cried all night after that conversation. She told me she finally understood why you had done what you did. She told me that we were turning you into Teresa." Oscar discreetly approached our table. "Mrs. Garcia, forgive the interruption. Mr. Richard has been an excellent employee. He always arrives early, treats everyone with respect, and customers comment positively on his service." Richard blushed slightly at the praise. "Thank you, Oscar. I'm learning a lot." After Oscar walked away, I looked at my son carefully. "Richard, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course, Mom. Are you doing all this just for the money? Just for the inheritance?" Richard was silent for a long moment. It was a question I had been waiting for the right time to ask. At first, he finally admitted, "Yes." The first few weeks, every action I took was calculated. Every word I said was to impress you. I was acting to get my inheritance back. His honesty surprised me. "But?" I asked, sensing there was more. But something changed when I started working here, when I started really interacting with people from different social classes, when I started to see how the employees spoke of you with such affection and respect. Richard paused. I realized that for years I had been living in a bubble of arrogance. He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. Mom, I really got to know Arthur for the first time. Did you know he has 3 children and is paying for his oldest daughter's college by working here? Did you know that you secretly paid for his gallbladder surgery last year? I smiled softly. Arthur is a good man, and I treated him as if he were invisible. I treated him as if he were just a waiter. But he's a hard-working father. He's a noble man. He's someone who deserves respect. Richard ran his hands through his hair. How could I have been so blind? And what about your career? I asked. Do you regret losing your executive position? Richard laughed, but it wasn't a bitter laugh. You know what? No. And that surprises even me. Why not? Because I realized my success was built on false values. I realized I was so obsessed with impressing others that I lost sight of who I really was. At that moment, Jessica entered the restaurant. She was no longer wearing expensive dresses or ostentatious jewelry. She wore simple but elegant clothes, and there was something different in her posture. She seemed more authentic. Hello, Susan, she greeted me, and for the first time in years, her greeting sounded genuine. How are you? I'm well. Jessica, how was the nursing home today? Emotional, she replied, sitting next to Richard. Teresa taught me how to knit, and she told me stories about her youth during the war. It's incredible the wisdom these people have. I saw Richard look at her with admiration. It was clear that these changes in Jessica had also strengthened their relationship. Susan, Jessica continued, I want to apologize, not just for that night at the restaurant, but for years of terrible behavior. What do you mean specifically? I asked. I needed to know that she understood exactly what she had done wrong. I mean all the times I excluded you from our lives because I thought you weren't sophisticated enough. I mean all the times I influenced Richard to be ashamed of you. I mean having judged your worth as a person based solely on your financial appearance. Her words sounded sincere. And now that you know I have money, how do you feel about it? Honestly, Jessica smiled sadly. I feel like an idiot. All these months working with the elderly, I've met so many extraordinary people who live with very little money but have immense emotional riches. Richard nodded. Mom, we've learned that real wealth has nothing to do with the money in the bank. I took an envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. Richard and Jessica looked at it with curiosity and some nervousness. What is that? Richard asked. It's an evaluation, I replied. For these 6 months, I have been observing, asking, investigating. I have spoken with your supervisors at the nursing home, with your colleagues here at the restaurant, with your neighbors in the small apartment. Jessica turned pale. An evaluation of what? Of whether your changes are genuine or if you are just acting for the money. I opened the envelope and took out several papers. Here is the report from the nursing home supervisor. It says that you not only meet your required hours, but you often stay extra time. It says you have connected emotionally with the residents. Richard and Jessica exchanged hopeful glances. Here is Oscar's report on Richard's performance as a waiter. It says he is respectful, hard-working, and that he genuinely cares about the customer's experience. I continued reading. And here are the observations from your neighbors about how you live now. They say you are humble, that you help other residents, that you don't complain about your reduced circumstances. And what is your conclusion? Jessica asked, her voice trembling. I put the papers back in the envelope and looked them straight in the eye. My conclusion is that you have learned your lesson. Not completely, because 6 months don't erase 5 years of problematic behavior, but you have shown that change is possible. Richard began to smile hopefully. Does that mean? It means, I said solemnly, that we are going to continue with this process, but with modifications. What kind of modifications? Jessica asked. First, Richard will continue to work at the restaurant, but now he will receive a fair salary and will have the opportunity to learn the business from the ground up. If he shows real ability and dedication, he could eventually have a role in management. Richard nodded enthusiastically. Second, you will move to a larger apartment, but you will not return to your previous lifestyle. You will live comfortably, but modestly. And third, I continued, we are going to start spending time together as a family. Real time, not an act. We are going to get to know each other as people. Jessica began to cry, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for giving us this chance. Don't thank me yet, I said firmly. This is just the beginning. You have to keep proving that these changes are permanent. Richard took my hand. Mom, I want you to know something. Even if you decide not to leave me any money, these months have been the most valuable of my life. I have learned who I really want to be. For the first time in years, I allowed the tears to flow freely down my cheeks. You know what, Richard? That's the only thing I ever wanted to hear you say. I stood up and looked around the restaurant where everything had changed 6 months ago. Tonight, when those cruel words came out of your mouth, I thought I had lost my son forever. But now I see that I didn't lose him. He was just hidden under layers of arrogance and false values. Richard stood up too and looked me in the eye. Mom, can I hug you now? I smiled, remembering my words from that night, that hugs were something to be earned. Yes, son, you've earned this hug. When Richard hugged me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The unconditional love of a son who finally understood his mother's worth. Not for her money, not for what she could give him, but for who she was as a person. Jessica joined the hug, and for the first time in a long time, I truly felt like I had a family. As we separated, I looked towards the restaurant tables. Some of the diners who had witnessed that terrible night were there again, and several smiled and nodded at me in approval. You know what's the most ironic thing about all this? I said to Richard. What? That by losing your arrogance and your obsession with money, you have finally become someone worthy of inheriting a fortune. Richard smiled, but it was a different smile. It was the smile of someone who had found something more valuable than money. He had found his humanity. And I, Susan Garcia, had found something I thought I had lost forever. I had found my son. Real wealth, after all, is not measured in dollars. It is measured in respect, in genuine love, and in the ability to see the value in every person, regardless of what they have or don't have. That night, as we left the restaurant together as a real family for the first time in years, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes, to save someone you love, you first have to be willing to lose them. And sometimes, the greatest wealth you can leave your children is not money, but the lesson of how to be a good person. Arriving at my home after 2 weeks away, my daughter-in-law greeted me by shouting from the living room as if I were a stranger. "What is this witch doing here? Get out of my house now." Her words hit me harder than anything I had ever felt before. She was pointing her finger at me on my own property, in the house I bought with my own sweat, with my hands cracked from scrubbing other people's floors. I just slipped my bag off my shoulders, walked in with firm steps, and answered, looking her directly in the eyes, "This house is mine, not your personal dump." I showed her the way to the door. My son, Matthew, did not even try to stop me. He just stood there, his gaze lowered, like a coward. And in that moment, I knew that what was coming next, neither of them would ever forget. But to understand how I got to that point, I have to tell you who I am. My name is Margaret Adler, and I am 72 years old. All my life, I worked cleaning other people's houses, taking care of children who were not mine, ironing clothes for people who never even knew my last name. I never complained. I never begged. I never held out my hand expecting anyone to give me anything. Every dollar I earned, I saved with discipline. Every cent I saved was with the thought of having my own roof, a place where no one could tell me what to do or how to live. And I did it. I bought this house 20 years ago, when I still had the strength to work double shifts and my knees did not ache so much. It is small, yes. It has 2 bedrooms, a modest living room, a kitchen that smells like coffee every morning, and a small yard where I grow my plants. But it is mine, only mine. I have lived alone since my husband died almost 15 years ago. Matthew, my only son, got married and left. I never asked him to stay. Children grow up and fly the coop. That is natural. But I always thought he would at least respect me, that he would remember everything I did for him. The nights I stayed up late, sewing clothes to sell so I could pay for his school. The times I ate less so he could eat more. the sacrifices a mother makes in silence, without expecting medals or applause. I lived peacefully. My routine was simple but dignified. I would get up early, make my coffee, water the plants, sweep the patio. Sometimes my friend Carol Peterson, a good woman who lives 3 houses down, would come over. We would sit in the kitchen drinking coffee and talking about life, about memories, about nothing and everything. She is one of those friends who does not judge, who does not criticize, who is just there when you need her. Carol is my age, maybe a year younger. She was widowed too, but she had better luck with her children. They visit her every week, take her to the grocery store, ask her how she is. I never felt envious of that. I just felt something like sadness when I saw how little Matthew cared about me. He would call once a month, if that. And when he did, it was just to ask if I was okay, but without really waiting for an answer. Everything changed when my sister Helen called me from another state. She was sick, very sick. She needed someone to take care of her because she could not move on her own. Her children lived far away, in another country, and could not come. So she called me. And of course, I went. Because that is what you do when family needs you. You drop everything and go. I told Matthew I would be gone for 2 weeks. He told me not to worry, that the house would be fine. I trusted him. I locked everything up, left the plants watered, said goodbye to Carol, and took the bus to the city where Helen lives. Those were 2 long weeks. My sister was suffering a lot. I slept little, cooked for her, bathed her, gave her medicine. I did not complain. It was my duty. But deep down, I missed my house. I missed my bed, my kitchen, my plants, the silence of my yard. I counted the days until I could return. And when the time finally came to go back, I felt happy. I took the bus back with a light heart, thinking about getting home, making a good pot of coffee, and resting in my armchair. I never imagined what was waiting for me. When I got off the bus and walked toward my street, something seemed strange. There was a car parked in front of my house, a car I did not recognize. I thought maybe it was a neighbor visiting someone. But as I got closer, I saw it was right in front of my door. I took out my keys slowly, my heart starting to beat faster. Something was not right. I opened the door, and the first thing I felt was the smell. It was not the smell of my house. It was a sweet, cloying perfume that I did not use. The lights were on. There were shoes in the entryway, women's shoes that were not mine. I stood there, my bag hanging from my shoulder, trying to understand what was happening. I walked slowly toward the living room, and there he was, Matthew, my son, sitting in my armchair, watching television as if nothing was wrong. He turned around when he heard me come in and looked at me with an expression I could not decipher. It was not surprise. It was not joy. It was something like discomfort. "Mom," he said softly, "I was not expecting you today." "What do you mean you were not expecting me?" I replied. "I told you I was coming back today." "What is going on here, Matthew?" He did not answer. He just got up and scratched the back of his neck, nervous. And then I heard it. A woman's voice coming from my bedroom. My bedroom. The most sacred place in my house. The one space that had always been just mine. "Who is it, Matthew? Is that old hag gone yet?" I felt the floor move beneath my feet. I walked to my room and opened the door without knocking. And there she was, Jessica, my son's wife, sitting on my bed, with her clothes thrown over my sheets, her creams and perfumes on my dresser, her shoes under my window. She looked at me as if I were the intruder. "What is this witch doing here? Get out of my house now." Those were her words. Exact. And she yelled them at me, pointing her finger as if I were trash, as if I were nothing. I could not move for a few seconds. I just stood there in the doorway of my own bedroom, looking at this woman yelling at me as if I were a stranger. Jessica was lounging on my bed, her legs crossed, painting her nails a bright red color that was staining my white sheets. My sheets. The ones I had washed and hung in the sun before I left. "Did you hear me?" I said, "Get out of here. This is my house now." Her voice was sharp, full of venom. But what hurt me the most was not her words. It was seeing Matthew standing behind me, saying nothing, not defending me, not even trying to silence her. He just stared at the floor like a scolded child, his hands in his pockets. "Matthew," I said, without taking my eyes off her, "are you going to explain what this means?" He swallowed and cleared his throat. "Mom, it is just. We needed a place to stay. Just for a few days. The apartment where we were living. We had problems with the landlord. He asked us to leave. I thought since you were not here, we could stay here until we found something." "Until you found something?" I repeated slowly, feeling the anger start to rise from my stomach to my throat. "And it did not occur to you to call me? To ask me? To ask for my permission?" "We just did not want to bother you," he mumbled. "We knew you were busy with Aunt Helen." Jessica let out a dry, scornful laugh. "Oh, please. You do not have to give her explanations, Matthew. This house is empty most of the time. What difference does it make if we use it?" I felt something inside me break. It was not an explosion. It was something deeper. Like a silent crack opening in the center of my chest, I walked slowly to the dresser and saw all her things there. Her expensive creams, her imported perfumes, her makeup scattered across the wood I had cared for years. I opened the closet and saw her clothes hanging next to mine. Dresses, blouses, shoes thrown in the bottom. Everything mixed together as if she had a right to be there. I turned and looked at her steadily. She was still painting her nails, as if none of this mattered to her. As if I did not exist. "This house is mine," I said, my voice firm but calm. "I bought it with my work, with my sweat, with years of sacrifice. And you have no right to be here without my permission." She looked up and stared at me with a mocking smile. "Oh, really? And what are you going to do? Kick me out? Please, lady, I am your son's wife. We are family. You should be happy to help us." I did not move. I just watched her in silence, feeling how each of her words stabbed into me like tiny needles. But I was not going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I was not going to shout. I was not going to beg her to leave. Because I knew that in that moment, if I lost control, she would win. I took a deep breath and turned to Matthew. "I want you to get your things out of my bedroom. Right now." "Mom, please," he said in a weak voice. "Just let us stay a few more days." "I promise I will." "I do not care what you promise," I interrupted him. "I want you to get everything out of here. This is my house, and if you are going to stay, it will be under my rules. But my room is mine. No one sleeps there except me." Jessica got off the bed with a sharp movement. "Your rules? Who do you think you are? We are here because Matthew is your son. You have an obligation to help us." "I have no obligation to you," I replied, looking her straight in the eye. "And if you think I am going to let you disrespect me in my own house, you are very mistaken." She took a step toward me, her arms crossed, and that look of superiority that made me sick. Matthew did nothing. He just stood there, like a useless shadow. And in that moment, I understood something I had never wanted to accept. My son was not the man I thought I had raised. He was a coward. A man with no backbone who let his wife humiliate me without lifting a finger. "Fine," I said finally. "Stay. But get your things out of my bedroom right now. Or I will." Jessica laughed in my face. "You are not going to do anything, lady, because if you do, Matthew will have to choose. And believe me, he is not going to choose you." Her words hurt more than I could have imagined. Because I knew she was right. Matthew was not going to defend me. He was not going to put her in her place. He was not going to do anything. And that was the saddest part of all. I left the bedroom without another word. I walked to the kitchen with my legs trembling and my heart pounding in my chest. I sat down in one of the chairs and just stayed there, staring at the table, trying to breathe. I felt that everything I had built, everything I had cared for over the years, was being invaded by someone who did not deserve to be there. I heard their voices from the room. Jessica was yelling at Matthew, telling him I was a bitter old woman, that I had no right to treat her like that he had to put me in my place. And he said nothing. He just listened to her. He just obeyed like a dog. I got up and started walking through the house. I needed to see everything. I needed to understand how far they had gone. I opened the kitchen cabinet and saw that my dishes were mixed with others I did not recognize. Cheap plastic plates she had brought. In the refrigerator, there was food I did not buy. Drinks, sauces, things I never used. Everything was jumbled, disorganized, as if someone had come in to ransack my life. I went to the bathroom and saw her products there too. Expensive shampoos, conditioners, body lotions, all taking up the space where I kept my things. I opened the cabinet, and my towels were thrown in the bottom, wrinkled, while hers were folded and arranged on the top shelf. I felt a cold fury run through my body. It was not an explosive rage. It was something worse. It was a deep, silent indignation that made me clench my teeth and ball my fists. But I was not going to shout. I was not going to beg. I was not going to plead for them to leave. Because I knew that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted to see me weak. She wanted to see me broken. I went back to the living room and sat in my armchair. Matthew came out of the room with a tired look on his face that did not stir any pity in me. He sat across from me and tried to speak. "Mom, I do not want to hear it," I said without looking at him. "I do not want your excuses. I just want to know one thing. How long were you planning to stay here without telling me?" He looked down. "I do not know. A couple of weeks. Maybe, until we got money for another place. And then what? Were you going to disappear without letting me know? Were you going to let me come back and find my house empty, as if nothing had happened? It is not like that, Mom. I was going to talk to you. I swear. Your oaths are worthless, Matthew, because if they were worth anything, you would not be here now. You would not have allowed that woman to talk to me like that. You would not have let her disrespect me in my own house." He did not answer. He just sat there, his hands between his legs, staring at the floor as if searching for something to say but could not find it, and I watched him in silence, feeling how the mother's love I always had for him was beginning to mix with something darker. Disappointment, sadness, contained rage. "Fine," I said finally, "stay. But this is my house. And here, my rules are respected. Understood?" He nodded without looking up. That first night, I could not sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of my own house that now felt strange. I could hear their voices from the other side of the wall. Jessica was talking loudly, not caring if I heard her. She was laughing, making derogatory comments, and Matthew said nothing to quiet her. He just mumbled things I could not make out. I got up early, as always. I made my coffee in silence, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But when I opened the cupboard to get my favorite mug, it was not there. I looked for it in the sink, in the drying rack, and found it thrown in the dishwasher, dirty, with lipstick stains on the rim. Jessica had used it. I felt something hot rise in my chest. It was not just a mug. It was my mug, the one I had used every morning for years, the one my husband gave me for our anniversary. And she had used it without asking, without care, as if everything that was mine was also hers. I washed it carefully, breathing deeply, trying to calm down. But every second that passed, it became harder to control what I was feeling. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the yard. My plants were still there, but they looked neglected. No one had watered them in 2 weeks. The leaves were dry, some fallen on the dirt. I went out to the yard and began to water them one by one. It was the only thing that calmed me in that moment. Feeling the soil between my fingers, watching the water soak the roots, taking care of something that depended on me. While I was doing it, I heard the door to their room open. Jessica came out in a robe, her hair loose, yawning as if she owned the place. She walked into the kitchen without greeting me. She opened the refrigerator and took out the carton of milk I had bought before I left. She poured herself a glass without asking and drank it, standing there, watching me through the window with an annoyed expression. "Do you always get up this early?" she asked in a mocking tone. "You make noise. You do not let me sleep." I did not answer her. I kept watering my plants, ignoring her, but she was not willing to leave me in peace. "Besides, this house is freezing. I do not know how you can live like this." "Matthew," she yelled toward the room, "you have to fix the heat. It is freezing in here." Matthew came out too, looking like he had just woken up, and went straight to the kitchen for coffee. He glanced at me but said nothing. He just prepared his mug and sat at the table, avoiding my gaze. I came in from the yard and sat across from him. Jessica remained standing by the sink, arms crossed, watching us as if waiting for me to do something she could use against me. "Matthew," I said calmly, "we need to talk." He nodded without looking up from his mug. "Yeah, Mom. How much money do you have saved to find another place?" He was quiet for a few seconds, stirring his coffee with the spoon unnecessarily. "Well, not much. We are a little tight right now." "How much?" I insisted. "I do not know. About $200. "Maybe," Jessica snorted. "And what are we going to do with that? That is not even enough for a security deposit on an apartment. You know what the rents are like these days, lady. Everything is outrageously expensive." "I did not ask for your opinion," I replied without looking at her. "I am talking to my son." She laughed sarcastically. "Oh, right. Because he is your perfect little boy, is not he? Well, let me tell you something, lady. Your perfect little boy does not have a stable job. And if it were not for me, he would be sleeping on the street." I felt my blood boil, but I held back. I took a deep breath and looked at Matthew again. "Is that true? You do not have a job?" He shrugged. "I lost the last one 2 months ago. I am looking, but it is not easy. Everyone wants experience in things I do not know how to do." "And what have you been spending your time on these last 2 months?" I asked in a firm voice. "Looking for work. Mom, I swear, I have sent out resumes. I have been to interviews. But nothing comes through." Jessica interrupted again. "That is why we need to stay here. We have nowhere else to go. And you live alone in this big house. I do not understand what the problem is." "The problem," I said, getting up from the chair and looking her straight in the eye, "is that you entered my house without my permission. The problem is that you treat me as if I am the intruder. The problem is that you do not have a shred of respect for me or for what is mine." She held my gaze with a cold smile. "Oh, please, do not play the victim. You should be grateful your son still remembers you. Because as unbearable as you are, I would not visit even if you paid me." Those words were like a punch to the gut. I looked at Matthew, waiting for him to say something, to shut her up, to defend me. But he just sat there, silent, staring at his coffee as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. And in that moment, I knew. I knew I would get no help from my own son. I knew he had chosen, and he had not chosen me. I turned and left the kitchen without another word. I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the bed and stayed there, breathing slowly, feeling the tears wanting to come, but I did not let them. I was not going to cry. I was not going to give that woman the pleasure of seeing me broken. I took out my phone and called Carol. I needed to talk to someone. I needed someone to tell me I was not crazy, that I was not exaggerating. "Margaret?" she answered, her voice warm. "Are you back?" "Yes, Carol, I am back. But I need you to come over. Please." "What happened?" She sounded worried. "I cannot explain it over the phone. Just come. I need you." She did not ask any more questions. She told me she would be at my house in half an hour, and she hung up. I sat on the bed, staring at the locked door, listening to the voices of Matthew and Jessica in the living room. She was still talking loudly, complaining about everything, that the house was old, that the furniture was ugly, that the bathroom needed remodeling, and Matthew said nothing. He just listened. I felt a sadness so deep I could barely breathe. Was this how it was all going to end? After everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for my son, this was how he was going to repay me? By letting his wife humiliate me in my own house? When the doorbell rang, I got up quickly and went to open it. It was Carol. She was holding a bag with pastries and had a worried look on her face. "What happened, Margaret?" she asked as soon as she walked in. I hugged her without saying anything, and she hugged me back, tight, without asking. We stood there in the entryway for a few seconds, and I felt that at least I had someone on my side. "Come on," I said. "Let's go to the kitchen. I will make you some tea." We walked to the kitchen, and when we entered, Jessica was still there, sitting at my table, painting her nails again. She looked up and glared at us. "Who is this?" she asked, without even a greeting. Carol looked at me, confused, but I touched her arm to calm her. "She is my friend," I answered Jessica coldly. "And she has more right to be here than you do." Jessica let out a fake laugh. "Oh, how funny. Now you are going to bring your little friends over to defend you? Pathetic. Carol took a step forward, but I stopped her. She is not worth it, I whispered. Let's go to the yard. We both went out to the yard and sat in the plastic chairs I had there. Carol looked at me, waiting for an explanation, and I did not even know where to begin. Margaret, what is going on? Who is that woman? She is my daughter-in-law, I said in a tired voice. Matthew's wife. They moved into my house while I was gone, and now they do not want to leave. Carol stared at me in silence, processing what I had just told her. I saw her expression change from confusion to indignation. She pressed her lips together and shook her head, disbelieving. Are you telling me they came in without your permission? She asked in a low, firm voice. And Matthew let that woman talk to you like that? I nodded without saying anything. The words were stuck in my throat. Carol took my hand in hers and squeezed it hard. Margaret, this is not right. You cannot let them treat you like this in your own home. You have to put a stop to it. I know, Carol, but I do not know how to do it without everything exploding. He is my son. I do not want to lose him. She looked at me with those eyes full of wisdom that only come with age. You already lost him, Margaret. The Matthew you raised would not let anyone disrespect you. That man in there is not your son anymore. He is her husband. Her words hurt because they were true. Matthew had changed since he married Jessica. He used to call more often, come to visit me. He would ask me how I was. But ever since she appeared in his life, everything was different. The visits became shorter, the calls more spaced out. And when he did come, she always found some excuse to criticize something. That my house was small, that my furniture was old, that I cooked with too much salt. At first, I thought she was just adjusting to her new life, that it was normal for him to put his wife first. But now I realized it was not adaptation. It was submission. Matthew had become someone I did not recognize. I am not going to beg them to leave, I told Carol, my voice firm. I'm not going to yell or fight, but I am not going to let them keep disrespecting me either. So, what are you going to do? She asked. I was quiet for a few seconds, thinking. Looking at the plants I had watered that morning, feeling the warm sun on my face. And then I knew exactly what to do. I am going to make their lives impossible, I said in a low voice. I am going to make them regret ever setting foot in my house without permission. Not with shouting, not with fights, but with actions. I am going to show them that this house has an owner, and that owner is me. Carol looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. Be careful, Margaret. That woman looks like she is capable of anything. I know. That is why I am not going to give her any reason to play the victim. Everything I do will be within my rights. This is my house, and I am in charge here. We stayed in the yard a while longer, drinking the peppermint tea I had made with the last of my mint leaves. We talked about other things, trying to distract ourselves. Carol told me about her grandchildren, about a neighbor who had fallen, about the daily life I had left behind for those 2 weeks. But my mind was elsewhere. I was planning every move. When Carol left, I went back into the house. Matthew was watching television in the living room. Jessica had gone out. He told me without me even asking. She went to the grocery store. I sat in the armchair across from him. We need to talk, I said. He turned off the television and looked at me with that scolded child face that irritated me so much now. Tell me, Mom, I want you to understand something very clearly, Matthew. This is my house. I paid for it. I take care of it. And as long as I live, no one is going to treat me like a stranger here. Did you hear me? He nodded. Yes, Mom. I talked to Jessica. I told her she has to be respectful. Oh, really? And what did she say? He averted his gaze. She said she was on edge, that it has been hard for her too, that she did not mean to disrespect you. Lies. I saw her. I heard everything she said. And she did it with full intention. Matthew sighed. Mom, please. We are going through a hard time. We just need a little time. Fine, I said, standing up. You will have time, but under my rules. And the first rule is this. My bedroom is mine. No one enters without my permission. Second, everything you use in this house, you leave clean and in its place. And third, respect. If your wife cannot respect me, then she does not stay here. Is that clear?" He nodded in silence. I left the living room without waiting for an answer. I went straight to my room and took out an old box where I kept important papers. Inside were the deeds to the house, the payment receipts, everything that proved this property was mine. I checked it all carefully, making sure everything was in order. Then, I searched online on my phone. I wanted to know what my rights were. What could I legally do to get them out of here if necessary? And I found the answer. As the owner, I had every right to ask them to leave. But there was a process. I had to give them written notice, an eviction notice. That same afternoon, I went to an office supply store downtown. I bought padlocks, 5 padlocks with their keys. I also bought a folder and some paper. I was going to do everything right, everything legally. Nothing she could use against me. When I got back home, Jessica had returned. She was in the kitchen cooking something that smelled strong and unpleasant. I walked past without greeting her and went straight to my room. I closed the door and started writing. I wrote a formal letter addressed to Matthew and Jessica. I gave them 3 days to vacate the property. I explained that they had entered without my consent and that they had no lease agreement. Everything was worded calmly, without insults, without emotion, just facts. When I finished, I walked to the local library and printed 2 copies, one for each of them. I returned home and put them on the living room table, where they could not ignore them. That night, during the dinner I made just for myself, Matthew found the letters. I heard him talking to Jessica in low, surprised voices. Then he knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, can I come in?" "No," I answered from inside. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it from there." "Is this for real?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You are going to kick us out?" "It is for real. You have 3 days. Mom, please, we have nowhere to go. You should have thought of that before you entered without permission. Before you disrespected me. Before you let your wife treat me like trash." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard his footsteps moving away. And then the voices. Jessica was screaming, furious. She said I was a bitter old woman, that I was going to regret this, that she was going to sue me for mistreatment. Matthew tried to calm her, but his voice sounded weak, defeated. I sat on my bed, listening to it all, and I did not feel guilt. I did not feel sadness. I just felt something like relief. For the first time in days, I had done something. I had taken control. The next morning, when I left my room, the house was silent. Matthew and Jessica were still asleep. I went to the kitchen and made my coffee, as always. But this time, when I opened the cupboard, I took out the padlocks I had bought. I started with the pantry. I took out everything that was mine and stored it in my room. I left only the things they had brought. Then I put the padlock on the pantry door. I did a similar thing with the cabinet, where I kept my good dishes, my pans, my quality pots. I left out only the basics, and I padlocked it. When I got to the refrigerator, I hesitated for a moment, but then I remembered how Jessica had used my milk without asking, how she had filled my fridge with her things without permission, so I took out everything that was mine, and I put a padlock on the refrigerator too. I was finishing when I heard footsteps. Matthew came out of his room and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the padlocks with a confused face. "Mom, what did you do?" "I protected what is mine," I replied calmly. "If you are going to be here, you will use only your things, not mine." "But how are we going to cook? How are we going to eat?" "That is your problem, Matthew, not mine." Matthew just stood there, staring at the padlocks as if he could not believe what he was seeing. He opened his mouth to say something, but closed it again. He did not know what to argue, because deep down, he knew I was right. This was my house, and if they wanted to stay, they were going to respect my things. Jessica came out minutes later, still in her pajamas, hair messy, and an angry look on her face. When she saw the padlocks, her expression changed from surprise to fury in a second. "What is this?" she yelled, pointing at the fridge. "Are you crazy? How are we supposed to store our food?" "Not my problem," I answered without getting upset. "You can buy a mini fridge if you want, or eat out, but my things are mine." She took a step toward me with clenched fists. "You cannot do this. It is inhumane. Matthew, say something to your mother. Tell her she is acting like a lunatic." Matthew just looked down. He said nothing. And that infuriated her even more. "You are useless," she yelled at him. "Your mother is humiliating you, and you just stand there like an idiot. Do something." I left the kitchen and went to the bathroom. I closed the door and splashed cold water on my face. I could hear her screaming from in there. Jessica was insulting, threatening, crying with rage. Matthew tried to calm her with soft words that were useless, and I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a 72-year-old woman who had worked her whole life, a woman who had raised her son alone, a woman who did not deserve to be treated like this. I dried my face and left the bathroom. I walked through the living room without looking at them and went straight to my room. I locked the door and sat on the bed. I took out my phone and looked up the number for a lawyer a neighbor had recommended to me years ago. I dialed and waited. "Good morning," a professional voice answered. "Law offices of Thompson and Associates." "Good morning. I need to consult about an eviction. Do you have any availability today?" They gave me an appointment for that same afternoon. I hung up and took a deep breath. This was serious. There was no turning back now. The rest of the morning was tense. Jessica locked herself in the room she shared with Matthew and did not come out. He stayed in the living room, watching television without paying attention. I got ready, put on my best dress, the one I wore for important occasions. I combed my hair carefully and put on the earrings my husband had given me. I wanted to feel dignified. I wanted to remind myself who I was. Before leaving, I knocked on their door. "Matthew," I said, "I'm going out. I will be back in a few hours." "Where are you going?" he asked from inside. "I have an appointment." "That is all you need to know." I did not wait for an answer. I grabbed my purse and left the house. I walked to the bus stop, feeling the sun on my face. It was a beautiful day. The sky was clear, and there was a soft breeze moving the leaves on the trees. I sat on the bench to wait and closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about everything that had happened, about how my life had taken such a drastic turn in just a few days. But I also thought about what I was doing, and I knew it was the right thing. I was not being cruel. I was not being vengeful. I was just defending what was mine. The bus arrived, and I got on. I paid my fare and sat by the window. I watched the streets go by, the houses, the people walking with their normal lives, and I wondered how many of those people were also fighting silent battles. How many were also being disrespected in their own homes. I arrived at the law office half an hour later. It was a small but clean building in the center of the city. I went up the stairs to the second floor and knocked. A young secretary greeted me with a kind smile. "Mrs. Adler?" she asked. "Yes, that is me. Mr. Thompson is waiting for you. Please, come in." She led me to a small office where a man in his 50s was sitting behind a desk full of papers. He stood up when I entered and offered me his hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Adler. I am Mark Thompson. Please, have a seat." I sat across from him and explained the whole situation. I told him about my trip, the return, about finding Matthew and Jessica living in my house without permission. I told him about the humiliation, the insults, the contempt. He listened attentively, taking notes. "I understand," he said when I finished. "This is a clear case of occupation without consent. As the owner, you have every right to demand they vacate the property." "How long does that process take?" I asked. "It depends. If they refuse to leave voluntarily, we would have to file a formal lawsuit. That can take weeks, even months. But there is a faster way, which is an expedited eviction order. It is filed when there is conflict in the cohabitation and the owner feels threatened or disrespected in her own home. With the right evidence, a judge can order the eviction in a matter of days. What evidence do I need? Witnesses, if there are any. Text messages, recordings, anything that proves the mistreatment. I also need the deeds to the property and a signed statement from you explaining the facts. I have the deeds, and I have a witness. My friend Carol was present when Jessica insulted me. Perfect. We can start with that. I will prepare the documents today. You come back tomorrow to sign them, and we will file them with the judge. If all goes well, in 2 days, you will have the order. I felt an enormous relief. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You do not know how much this means to me. I understand your situation, Mrs. Adler, and believe me, you are doing the right thing. No one has the right to disrespect you in your own home, not even your son. I left the office feeling lighter. I had finally taken the definitive step. It was no longer just threats. It was no longer just padlocks. It was something real, something legal, something they could not ignore. I returned home on the afternoon bus. When I arrived, the door was open. I went in and found Matthew sitting in the living room with a worried look on his face. "Mom," he said, standing up, "we need to talk. There is nothing to talk about. Matthew, please, just hear me out." I stopped and looked at him. There was something in his expression I had not seen before. He looked scared. "Jessica is furious. She says she is going to call the police. She says you are mistreating her. Let her call whoever she wants. I have not done anything illegal. This is my house, and I have the right to protect my things. Mom, please. I do not want this to end badly. We are family. Family respects each other, Matthew. And you two have not respected me since you arrived. Give me one more chance. I promise I will talk to her. I will make her understand. You have had plenty of chances. And you wasted every single one." I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on the bed and sighed deeply. I was tired. Not physically, emotionally. Tired of fighting. Tired of justifying myself. Tired of begging for respect. That night I did not eat dinner. I was not hungry. I just went to bed early and tried to sleep, but the noises in the house kept me awake. I heard Matthew and Jessica arguing in low voices. I heard footsteps, doors opening and closing, and at some point, I heard something that put me on alert. They were trying to force one of the padlocks. I got up silently and opened my door just a crack. I saw them in the kitchen, trying to break the padlock on the pantry with a screwdriver. Matthew held a flashlight while Jessica pried at it. I felt a rage I had not felt before. I left my room and turned on the kitchen light. They froze, like thieves caught in the act. "What do you think you are doing?" I asked in a cold voice. Jessica dropped the screwdriver. "We are hungry. You will not let us use anything. What do you expect us to do?" "I expect you to have respect. But I see that is impossible for you." Matthew tried to explain. "Mom, we just wanted. Get out of my kitchen. Now." They did not move. Jessica looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You are a cruel old woman. I do not know how Matthew can be the son of someone so evil. And I do not know how my son could marry someone as trashy as you." We stood there, staring at each other. Matthew was between us, not knowing what to do, and then Jessica took a step toward me. Jessica took a step toward me with her fists clenched and her jaw tight. For a moment, I thought she was going to hit me, but I did not back down. I stood firm, looking her straight in the eye, without fear, because I knew if I showed weakness, she would use it against me. "Go ahead," I said in a calm voice. "Touch me. Give me one more reason to call the police." She stopped. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. Her eyes shone with rage, but she knew I was right. Anything she did now would only worsen her situation. Matthew grabbed her arm. "Come on. Jessica, it is not worth it." She shook him off roughly. "Do not touch me. This is your fault. For being a coward. For not defending your wife. I am not attacking her," I said calmly. "I am just protecting what is mine. If she cannot understand that, it is her problem, not mine." Jessica shot me one last look full of hatred and stormed out of the kitchen. Matthew stood there for a few seconds, staring at the floor, not knowing what to say. "Go, Matthew, and take that screwdriver with you. The next time you try to force something that does not belong to you, I am calling the police. I do not care if you are my son." He picked up the screwdriver with trembling hands and followed Jessica out. I heard them arguing in the bedroom. Their voices were a constant murmur that lasted for hours. And I stayed in the kitchen, checking the padlocks to make sure they had not managed to damage any of them. Everything was fine. I went back to my room, and this time I put a chair against the door. I did not feel safe. Not in my own house. And that hurt me more than any insult. I could not sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to every noise, every creak of the wood, every step in the hallway. My mind would not stop racing. How far would they go? What else were they capable of doing? The next morning, I got up early, as always. I made my coffee in silence and went out to the yard. The cool morning air helped clear my head. I watered my plants, swept the fallen leaves, fixed some pots that were out of place. It was my routine. It was what kept me sane. Carol arrived shortly after noon. She knocked on the door, and when I opened it, she was holding a bag of food. "I brought you lunch," she said with a smile. "I know you have not been eating well, thank you. You do not know how much I needed to see you." We went into the kitchen, and she saw the padlocks. She shook her head sadly. "Margaret, this is terrible. You cannot go on like this." "I know. I went to a lawyer yesterday. I am going to file for an eviction order." "Really?" Carol asked. "Really? I cannot take it anymore, Carol. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to talk. But they do not understand. They only understand when it hurts them." She put her hand on my shoulder. "I am proud of you. I know it is not easy. But you are doing the right thing." We ate lunch together in the yard, far from the room where Matthew and Jessica were still holed up. We talked about everyday things, trying to distract ourselves. But I could not stop thinking about what was coming. When Carol left, I went back into the house. I had to go to the law office to sign the papers. I got ready again. I put on the same dress as yesterday because it was the only one that made me feel strong. I took my purse and left without telling anyone. At the office, Mr. Thompson already had everything prepared. He showed me the documents. He explained every point, every clause. I read everything carefully before signing. "With this, Mrs. Adler, we can file the order tomorrow morning. The judge will review it, and if everything is in order, he will approve it that same day. Then an officer will come to deliver it personally. From that moment, they have 48 hours to vacate." "And if they do not?" I asked. "Then the police intervene. But believe me, when they see the official order, most people leave. They do not want legal trouble." I signed all the papers with a steady hand. Every signature was one step closer to getting my peace back, to getting my house back, to getting my dignity back. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for helping me. It is my job, ma'am. But it is also the right thing to do. No one deserves to be mistreated in their own home." I left the office feeling like I had made the definitive decision. There was no turning back. In 2 days, 3 at most, they would be out of my house. When I got back, the house was silent. I thought maybe they had gone out, but when I passed their room, I heard low voices. They were there, planning something, probably. I went to the kitchen and unlocked my private pantry. I took out rice, beans, a little chicken I had saved. I cooked for myself alone. The smell filled the house, and I knew they were smelling it. I knew they were hungry, but I did not care. When I finished cooking, I served myself a plate and sat down to eat at the kitchen table. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, enjoying my food in my house, and I did not feel guilt. I did not feel pity. I just felt I was doing what I had to do. Matthew came out of the room as I was finishing. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at my plate with hungry eyes. "Is there anything for us?" he asked in a small voice. "No," I replied without looking at him. "There is a corner store. You can buy something there. Mom, we do not have any money." "That is not my problem, Matthew. You decided to stay here without my permission. Now you face the consequences. But we are your family. Family is earned with respect, not just blood." He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked something I was not expecting. "Why do you hate us so much?" I looked up and met his gaze directly. "I do not hate you, Matthew. I would hate you if I still cared about you. But I do not. I do not care if you are hungry. I do not care if you are uncomfortable. I do not care if you feel humiliated. Because I have felt all of those things since you arrived, and you did not lift a finger to stop it." His eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry, Mom. I am really sorry. Your apologies are too late, son. Far too late." He turned and went back to the room. I heard him talking to Jessica. She yelled something I did not understand. And then there was silence. I washed my plate, put the leftovers in a container, locked it, and locked everything up again. Every movement was a declaration. This is my house. These are my things. And you are not entitled to any of it. That night I slept a little better, knowing that the order would arrive at any moment, that soon this would all be over, that soon I would have my house back to myself. The next morning, Mr. Thompson called me early. "Mrs. Adler, I have good news. The judge approved the order. They are going to deliver the notice this afternoon." I felt a huge weight lift off my chest. "Thank you. Mr. Thompson, thank you so much. Be prepared for what comes." Sometimes people react badly when they receive these notices. If you feel you are in danger, call the police immediately. I will. Do not worry. I hung up and sat on my bed, breathing deeply. Today was the day. Today everything changed. I got ready with care. I put on my best clothes, did my hair, even put on a little lipstick. I wanted to be presentable when the officer arrived. I wanted Matthew and Jessica to see me as dignified, firm, unbreakable. I waited in the living room, sitting in my armchair, watching the time on the wall clock. Every minute seemed like an eternity. Matthew and Jessica had not left the room all day. They were probably hoping I would give in, that I would get tired of this silent war. But they were wrong. At 3 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I got up slowly and went to open it. It was a uniformed man with a folder in his hand. "Mrs. Margaret Adler?" he asked. "Yes, that is me. I have a court notice for Mr. Matthew Adler and Miss Jessica Valverde. Are they at the residence?" "Yes, they are here. Please come in." The officer entered, and I knocked on their bedroom door. "Matthew, Jessica, come out. There is someone here who wants to talk to you." The door opened slowly. Matthew came out first, his face confused. Jessica was behind him, scowling. "Who are you?" she asked when she saw the officer. "I am an officer of the civil court. I am here to serve you with an eviction order." Matthew and Jessica froze. The color drained from their faces. Jessica was the first to react, taking a step toward the officer with an incredulous expression. "What did you say? An order for what?" The officer held out the papers to them. "An eviction order issued by the civil court. The owner of this property, Mrs. Margaret Adler, has requested that you vacate the premises. You have 48 hours from this moment to leave the residence with all your belongings." Matthew took the papers with trembling hands. His eyes scanned the words, not really understanding what he was reading. Jessica snatched them from his hands and began to read aloud, becoming more and more agitated. "This cannot be legal. She cannot just kick us out like this. We are family." The officer maintained his professional tone. "Mrs. Adler is the sole registered owner of this property. You have no lease agreement or document that gives you the right to remain here. The law is on her side. If you do not comply with the order within the established time frame, a forced eviction will be carried out with police intervention." Jessica looked at me with a hatred so intense I could almost feel it physically. "You did this. You are putting us out on the street." "I did what I had to do to get my peace back," I replied calmly. "You had the chance to leave on good terms. You chose to stay and disrespect me. Now face the consequences." Matthew kept staring at the papers as if expecting the words to change. His face was a mask of shock and betrayal. "Mom, you cannot do this. We are your family. You stopped treating me like family the day you allowed your wife to insult me in my own house," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "The day you entered without permission. The day you made me feel like a stranger in the place I built with my own sweat," the officer interrupted. "If you have no further questions, I will leave. The papers have all the necessary information. If you require legal advice, you can consult with an attorney, but I recommend you comply with the order. Good day." He left the house, leaving a heavy silence behind. Matthew just stood there, holding the papers as if they were a death sentence. Jessica, on the other hand, began to pace, breathing heavily, trying to control her fury. "This is unbelievable. This is abuse. I am going to sue her. I am going to call a lawyer, and I am going to sue her for mistreatment, for familial neglect, for everything." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "My lawyer will be waiting for your call. In the meantime, you have 48 hours. I suggest you start packing. We are not leaving, she said, crossing her arms. You cannot force us. The police can, and they will if necessary. So you decide. You leave on your own 2 feet with some dignity, or you leave escorted by the police for all the neighbors to see. It makes no difference to me, Matthew finally spoke. His voice sounded broken. Mom, please, give me a chance. Let's talk. We can fix this. There is nothing left to fix. Son, I have already made my decision. But we have nowhere to go. That is not my problem. You should have thought of that before. Jessica let out a bitter laugh. You know what? You are right about one thing. You are cruel. You are a cruel, bitter old woman who is going to end up alone. And when you are on your deathbed, no one will be there to hold your hand. No one will cry for you because you pushed away your only family. Her words were meant to hurt me. They were meant to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt, but they did not work anymore. I had already cried all the tears I had. I had already felt all the pain I could feel. I would rather die alone and in peace than live accompanied and humiliated, I replied. Now, if you will excuse me, I have things to do. I turned and went to my room. I closed the door and sat on the bed. I could hear their agitated voices on the other side. Jessica was still screaming, blaming Matthew for everything. He tried to calm her down without success, and I just breathed deeply, feeling how every second brought me closer to my freedom. That afternoon, I called Carol and told her everything. She came over immediately, worried about how they might react. Do you want me to stay with you tonight? She asked. I do not like you being alone with them, knowing they are desperate. I will be fine, I told her. But thank you for worrying. Margaret, these people are capable of anything. Be careful. I will. I promise if anything happens, I will call the police immediately. Carol stayed with me until it got dark. We drank tea in the yard, talking about everything except the situation. I needed a moment of normalcy, a breather before what was to come. When she left, I went back inside. The house was strangely quiet. Matthew and Jessica were in their room with the door closed. No voices. No movement. Just silence. I got ready for bed, but this time I locked the door and also put a chair under the handle. I did not feel safe. I did not know what they were capable of now that they felt cornered. The night passed slowly. I slept little, always alert to any noise, but nothing happened. When dawn broke, I got up tired, but relieved that it had passed without incident. I left my room and went to the kitchen. I made my coffee as always, trying to keep my routine. But everything felt different. The air was heavy, dense, as if the house itself were waiting for something to explode. Matthew came out shortly after. He had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his face was haggard. He looked like he had not slept at all. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at me with pleading eyes. Mom, I need to talk to you. Please. There is nothing to talk about, Matthew. Yes, there is. Please, just hear me out for 5 minutes. I sighed and sat across from him. You have 5 minutes. He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. I know I screwed everything up. I know I should have defended you from the beginning. I know Jessica crossed the line, and I was a coward for not putting her in her place. But Mom, please do not put us on the street. Give me one last chance. I swear things will change. Things do not change, Matthew. People change. And you are not going to change because you do not want to. You chose your wife over your mother, and that is fine. It is your right. But I also have the right to choose myself, and that is what I am doing. But we are your family. Family is not just blood, son. It is respect. It is love. It is mutual care. And you gave me none of that. His eyes filled with tears. If you kick us out, I will never forgive you. That is your decision. I have already made mine. He stood up from the table abruptly. Fine. If that is what you want, fine. But do not expect me to come back. Do not expect me to call. Do not expect anything from me ever again. I never expected anything from you, Matthew, except respect, and you could not even give me that. He stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door. I heard him talking to Jessica, telling her to pack, that they were leaving, that they would never come back. And I stayed sitting in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the son I lost. Relief for the peace I would soon regain. For the rest of the day, I heard them packing their things, drawers opening and closing, clothes being stuffed into bags. Abrupt, noisy movements. But they did not come out of the room. They did not talk to me. They did not look at me. I stayed in the yard most of the time, watering my plants, sweeping, tidying up, preparing myself mentally for the moment they would finally leave. When night fell, they were still there. The 48 hours were not up yet. They had until noon tomorrow. And I knew they were going to drag it out until the last second. They were going to make me suffer until the very end. I went to bed early, but I could not sleep. I heard them moving around the house. I heard their whispers. I heard their footsteps. And part of me was afraid they would try something, that they would break something, that they would hurt me in some way. But nothing happened. When dawn broke, I got up, my body aching from being so tense. Today was the day. Today the deadline was up. Today I got my house back. I woke up that morning with a strange feeling in my chest. It was the last day. At noon, the 48 hours would be up. And after that, if they were still here, I would have to call the police. Part of me hoped they would just leave without drama. But another part knew Jessica would not make it easy. I made my coffee in silence. The sun was just beginning to stream through the kitchen window, lighting up the plants in the yard. I sat down to drink my mug slowly, trying to calm my nerves. Today, it all ended. Today I got my peace back. I heard movement in the bedroom, heavy footsteps, the sound of something being dragged across the floor. They were awake, maybe packing the last of their things, or maybe planning something. I did not know what to expect from them anymore. Matthew came out first. He was carrying a box and glanced at me as he walked toward the door. He said nothing, not good morning, not goodbye. He just walked out and put the box in the car they had parked outside. He came back in and repeated the process several times. Every time he passed through the kitchen, he avoided my gaze. I just sat there, watching. I was not going to help them. I was not going to ask if they needed anything. I was not going to do anything that could be interpreted as weakness or regret. I just waited. Jessica appeared an hour later. Her hair was loose and messy, her face bare of makeup, and she had an expression of exhaustion mixed with rage. She saw me sitting in the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. "I hope you are happy," she said in a cutting voice. "I hope it is worth it, being alone in this cold, old house." I did not answer her. I just looked at her in silence, drinking my coffee. My silence infuriated her more than any words. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" she continued. "That you are going to die here alone, and no one is going to come to your funeral, because you pushed away the only person who still cared about you." "Matthew never cared about me," I finally said in a calm voice. "He cared about having a place to live for free. There is a difference." She let out a bitter laugh. "Think whatever you want. It does not matter anymore. We are leaving. And believe me, we are never coming back, not even if you beg us. I do not plan on begging anyone for anything. You can leave in peace." She turned and left the kitchen. I heard her yelling at Matthew, telling him to hurry up, that she wanted to get out of this house as soon as possible. He mumbled answers I could not hear. The hours passed. They kept taking things out. Boxes, bags, clothes. I was surprised how much they had accumulated in such a short time. Or maybe they had brought more than I thought. Maybe they had always planned to stay for a long time. At 11 in the morning, Carol knocked on the door. I opened it, and she came in with a bag of fresh pastries and a worried smile. "How are you?" she asked, hugging me. "Okay. They are almost gone. They are taking their things out now. Do you want me to stay with you?" "Yes. I would like you to be here when they leave." We sat in the living room, watching in silence as Matthew went back and forth with his things. Jessica came out with a bag full of clothes and looked at us with contempt. "How convenient that you have your little friend here. You need witnesses for your victory, do not you?" Carol stood up. "Young lady, I suggest you leave with what little dignity you have left. You have done enough damage." Jessica was about to say something, but Matthew grabbed her arm. "Let's go. We are almost done." She shook him off, but followed him outside. We heard them arguing by the car. Their voices carried inside, loaded with frustration and anger. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" Carol asked in a low voice. "Because once they leave, there might be no turning back." "I am sure. More sure than I have been in a long time." She nodded and squeezed my hand. "Then I support you, no matter what." At noon sharp, Matthew came in one last time. He looked around the house, as if searching for something he had forgotten, or maybe saying goodbye. He stopped in front of me. His eyes were red, swollen. He had been crying. "This is a mistake, Mom. Someday you are going to regret this. If I regret it, it will be my problem, not yours." "Just like that? You are not even going to say goodbye to me?" "Goodbye, Matthew. Take care of yourself." He waited a few seconds, maybe believing I would change my mind at the last moment, that I would hug him and tell him to stay. But I did not. I sat there, firm, unmoving. "Fine," he said finally, "if that is what you want. Goodbye, Mom." He walked out of the house without looking back. I heard the car door slam. I heard the engine start, and I heard them drive away down the street until the sound disappeared completely. I sat there in the silence. Carol was by my side, saying nothing, just keeping me company. And then I felt something I did not expect. It was not joy. It was not sadness. It was relief. A profound relief, like when you take off a shoe that has been hurting you all day. "They are gone," I said in a low voice. "They are gone," Carol repeated. "How do you feel?" I thought for a few seconds. Tired, but free. She hugged me, and we stayed like that for a long time. When she pulled away, she looked at me with those understanding eyes. "Do you want me to help you clean?" she asked. "Yes, please." We got up and went to the room where they had slept. When I opened the door, I could not believe what I saw. They had left everything thrown around. The bed unmade, dirty clothes on the floor, food wrappers, empty bottles. They had left it a complete disaster, as a final show of contempt. "Look at this," Carol said, indignant. "They did not even have the decency to leave the room clean." I felt the anger rising again, but I controlled it. I was not going to let this affect me. They were gone. They had no more power over me. "It is okay," I said. "We will clean it, and that is that. I want to erase any trace that they were ever here." We spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. We washed the sheets, mopped the floor, aired out the room. Carol worked beside me without complaint, helping me reclaim my space. By 5 in the afternoon, when we finished, the room no longer smelled like them. There were no traces left. It was just an empty room waiting to be filled with good things again. "Thank you, Carol. I do not know what I would do without you." "That is what friends are for," she replied with a smile. "Do you want me to stay for dinner?" "No, thank you. I think I need to be alone for a while. I need to get used to the silence again." She understood. She hugged me one last time and left, promising to come back the next day. When I closed the door behind her, I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at my house. My house. Silent. Empty. But mine. I walked slowly through each room. I touched the walls. I opened the windows. I breathed in the clean air that came in. And for the first time in days, I smiled. I went to the kitchen and took off all the padlocks. I did not need them anymore. I opened the pantry, the refrigerator, the cabinets. Everything was available again. Everything was mine again, without restrictions. I made my favorite dinner, chicken soup with vegetables, the kind I used to make when my husband was alive. The kind I had not made in a long time because it was too much for one person. But tonight, I did not care. I cooked calmly, enjoying every step. The smell filled the house, replacing any trace of what had happened. I sat down to eat dinner alone at my table, and for the first time, I did not feel lonely. I felt accompanied by my own presence, by my own strength, by everything I had fought for to get here. After dinner, I washed the dishes and went out to the yard. The sky was clear, full of stars. I sat in my usual chair and looked up. I thought about my husband, about how he would be proud of me for not letting myself be trampled, about how he would have supported me in every decision. I thought about Matthew, about the boy he was and the man he became. I felt sadness for what we could have been and were not. But I did not feel regret. I did what I had to do. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Carol. "You did the right thing. I am proud of you." I smiled and replied, "Thank you for being there." I stayed in the yard until the night chill made me go inside. I locked everything calmly, turned off the lights, and went to my room. I got into my bed and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. Without startling, without fear, without padlocks on the door, because my house was my refuge again, and no one was ever going to take it away from me again. I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my window. I had not set an alarm, but my body woke up on its own, as always. It was 6 in the morning, but this time, something was different. The silence of the house was not heavy or uncomfortable. It was peaceful. It was mine. I stayed in bed for a few more minutes, just breathing, feeling the clean sheets, listening to the birds singing outside. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel that knot in my stomach when I woke up. There were no voices to fear, no scornful looks waiting for me. There was just me and my home. I got up slowly and went to the kitchen. I made my coffee calmly, enjoying every step. I heated the water, put in the filter, poured the exact amount of sugar I liked. Everything as I had always done it, but now with a sense of freedom I had forgotten. I went out to the yard with my steaming mug. My plants looked greener, more alive. Or maybe it was me who saw them differently. I sat in my chair and took the first sip of the day. The coffee was perfect. The cool morning air caressed my face. And I realized something important. I had not lost anything. I had gained everything. I spent the morning tidying up the house. Not because it was dirty, but because I wanted to fill it with my energy again. I moved some furniture around. I put fresh flowers on the living room table. I opened all the windows to let the sun in. I wanted every corner to remember that this house had an owner, and that owner was me. Mid-morning, the doorbell rang. It was Carol, as she had promised. She brought fresh bread and that warm smile I needed so much. "Good morning, Margaret. How did you sleep?" "Like I have not slept in years," I replied with a genuine smile. We went into the kitchen, and I made more coffee. We sat down to have breakfast together, talking about simple things. About the weather, about the neighbors, about the flowers that were growing in her garden. It was a normal, everyday conversation, and it was exactly what I needed. "Did you hear anything from Matthew?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. "No, and I do not expect to." "And how do you feel about that?" I thought for a few seconds. "Sad, I guess, but not regretful. There is a difference." She nodded. "It is normal to feel sad, Margaret. He is your son. But you did the right thing. No one has the right to treat you badly, not even your own family. I know. And for the first time in a long time, I put myself first, and I do not feel guilty about it. You should not. That is not selfishness. That is self-respect." We finished breakfast, and Carol offered to help me in the garden. We spent the rest of the morning pruning, watering, fixing the plants that had been neglected. Working with my hands in the dirt made me feel connected to something bigger. It reminded me that life goes on, that things grow, that after the drought comes the rain. When Carol left at noon, I was alone again. But this time the solitude did not weigh on me. It was company. It was peace. I made a simple lunch and sat down to eat, looking out the window at the yard. Every bite tasted better than the last. After washing the dishes, I sat in the living room with a book I had left unopened for months. I opened it and started to read. The words flowed easily. The story captivated me. It had been so long since I had time to read. It had been so long since my mind was calm enough to enjoy something so simple. I read for hours, lost in another story, in another world. And when I looked up, I realized it was already getting dark. The day had passed peacefully, without upsets, without conflict, just me, my house, and my peace. That night, as I was making dinner, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but finally, I did. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end. Then I heard breathing, and then a voice I knew all too well. "Mom." It was Matthew. I did not respond. I just waited for him to say what he had to say. I just I wanted to know if you were okay. I am fine, Matthew. Better than before. Another long silence. Mom, I am sorry. I am really sorry. I should not have let things get that far. It is a little late for apologies. Do not you think? I know. But I needed to tell you. I needed you to know that I regret it. That I understand I ruined everything. I stayed quiet, feeling the emotions rising. But I was not going to let myself be swayed. I was not going to give in just because he felt guilty. Where are you now? I asked. With a friend of Jessica's. He let us stay for a few days while we look for something. I am looking for a job. For real this time. I am glad to hear that. Mom, do you think you could ever forgive me? I do not know, Matthew. I do not know. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry. And that even though I am angry, you are still my mom, and you are still my son. But that does not mean I am going to let myself be disrespected again. I know. I will not bother you anymore. I just wanted to hear your voice. Take care, Matthew. You too, Mom. He hung up, and I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of emotions. Sadness, relief, hope. But above all, peace. Because I knew I had done the right thing, that I had not given in, that I had kept my dignity. I finished making dinner and sat down to eat alone. And this time, I did not feel sad. I felt whole, because I understood something fundamental. Loneliness is not the same as being alone. Loneliness hurts. Being alone can be a blessing. After dinner, I went back out to the yard. The sky was cloudy, and it smelled like rain. I sat in my chair and waited. A few minutes later, the first drops began to fall. Then came the heavy rain, beating on the roof, soaking the earth, filling the air with that fresh smell I loved so much. I sat there under the eaves, protected from the rain but feeling its coolness. And I thought about everything that had happened. About how I had fought, about how I had suffered, but also about how I had won. I had not yelled. I had not begged. I had not lost my dignity. I had only set boundaries. I had only defended what was mine. And that was enough. My phone vibrated with a message. It was Carol again. Is it raining over there too? I love these afternoons. I smiled and replied, Yes, it is beautiful. She answered quickly, I will come by tomorrow with more bread, and we can drink tea and watch the rain if it continues. I would love that. I put the phone away and went back to watching the rain. I thought about my life, about everything I had built, about everything I had lost, and about everything I had gained. I had lost my son, it is true, but I had gained my peace. I had gained my dignity. I had gained my home back. And if Matthew ever came back, it would be different. Because now he knew that I was not someone who could be trampled on, that I had boundaries, that I deserved respect. The rain kept falling, and I kept sitting there, in my house, in my yard, in my peace. A 72-year-old woman who had learned the most important lesson of all, that respect is not pleaded for, it is demanded. That self-love is not selfishness, it is survival. That being alone is not a punishment, it is a choice. And that my home is the place where there is respect. And whoever does not understand that stays outside. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The air smelled like wet earth, like new beginnings, like second chances, not for them. For me, I got up and went into the house. I closed the patio door calmly. I turned off the lights one by one, and I went to my room. I lay down in my bed and looked at the ceiling. I could hear the rain tapping against the window. It was a calming sound, a sound that reminded me that after the storm, there is always calm. And I was already calm. I closed my eyes and let sleep overcome me. And for the first time in weeks, I had no nightmares. I had no worries. I just had peace. Because this house was mine. This life was mine. And no one was ever going to take it away from me again. Tomorrow would be another day. Maybe Matthew would call again. Maybe not. Maybe someday we could reconcile. Or maybe not. But that did not keep me up at night anymore. Because I had learned something it took me 72 years to understand. I did not lose anything. I just moved away from those who did not know how to stay, and that was not a loss. It was my most silent victory.